What did a stranger say to you at your wedding that changed the way you saw everything? I still remember how the late afternoon sunlight glinted off the stained glass windows, bathing the entire church in a soft kaleidoscope of color. People say a wedding is supposed to be the happiest moment of your life, yet there I was, gripping my bouquet with sweaty palms, my heart racing so hard I could barely breathe. The organ music was playing, my friends and family were watching, and my groom, Ethan, stood at the end of the aisle with a hopeful smile. But my eyes weren't fixed on him. They were drawn to a tall, dark-haired stranger standing near the last pew. He wasn't dressed like a guest. No boutonniere pinned to his lapel. No expression of celebration on his face. Instead, he gazed at me with this piercing, almost sorrowful intensity. I couldn't understand why my chest tightened at the sight of him or why my feet froze, refusing to take another step. Then, in a voice that somehow cut through the music and the murmurs, he said, "Ava, you're making a terrible mistake." My ears rang. It felt like someone had poured ice water down my spine. 100 thoughts collided in my head, each one more frantic than the last. No one else seemed to hear him, or at least they pretended not to. But I heard him, and I saw the flicker of fear in Ethan's eyes too, though he couldn't possibly know what the stranger had just said. It only took those few words to unravel. I should rewind the clock and explain how I got there, poised in a wedding gown, confronted by a stranger's warning at the worst, or best, possible moment. If you had seen me just a year prior, you'd never have guessed I could be so uncertain about marriage. I was the kind of person who made color-coded lists for everything. My life was a neat, labeled container, or so I believed. We grew up in a small town in Vermont, Ethan and I. We were high school sweethearts, the golden couple everyone assumed would get married eventually. After graduation, we even went to the same college. Though we had different majors, he studied finance, I studied literature, we somehow balanced each other out. He was the calm to my storm. I was the dreamer to his pragmatism. Everything about us just fit, or that's what everyone said. We took the next logical step and moved in together after college. Our families joked that it was only a matter of time before we tied the knot. And yes, I loved him. But my love was the gentle, comfortable kind, without fiery sparks. I told myself that's how real relationships feel after so many years. Steady, not necessarily passionate. It was easy to assume we'd stay together forever, especially since no major conflicts arose. We split bills, cooked dinner together, argued occasionally about whose turn it was to take out the trash, but we never had a reason to question whether we belonged in each other's lives. A few months before the proposal, I'd started a new job as a junior editor at a small publishing house. I was thrilled to be working with books. My dream was to one day write my own novel, though that ambition sat quietly on a back burner. Ethan, meanwhile, was excelling at his accounting firm, his career on a fast track. We were a sensible, upwardly mobile couple, just as everyone expected. Then, one chilly autumn evening, he surprised me with a ring during a weekend trip to the Catskills. We were in a cabin with a crackling fireplace, sipping red wine, the kind of scene you might find on a postcard. When he dropped to one knee, I said yes. I was giddy that night. My parents were delighted. My sisters squealed with excitement, and my coworkers teased me good-naturedly about wedding themes. "You must be so happy," people kept saying. It almost felt as though I had no choice but to be overjoyed. So I swept any tiny doubts aside and plunged into wedding planning with my usual thoroughness. I bought bridal magazines, pinned ideas on Pinterest, and scouted venues. We chose a picturesque church because Ethan's grandparents had wed there. It felt romantic, meaningful, and, most important, expected. The trouble started small. Restless nights. I found myself tossing and turning, haunted by a vague sense of unease. I chalked it up to planning stress. Then came moments of unusual irritability. I snapped at my mom over seating arrangements, or I got into a silly argument with Ethan about whether to serve salmon or steak. I saw the flicker of hurt in his eyes when I snapped at him, and I immediately felt guilty. Why was I so on edge? I chalked that up to stress too. I told myself once the wedding was over, I'd feel better. About 2 weeks before the wedding, I decided to pick up my gown from the tailor on my own. Originally, my mom had planned to come with me, but I told her I wanted a bit of alone time. While waiting in line, I struck up a conversation with an older woman who was also picking up a fancy dress, perhaps for her granddaughter's wedding, I assumed. She mentioned that weddings can be the loneliest days of our lives if we're marrying someone for the wrong reasons. I froze, trying to laugh it off. But she gave me a pointed look. "Make sure," she said gently, "you're not just following the script someone else handed." Those words stuck to me like glue. Was I following a script? Had my love for Ethan turned into an obligation to fulfill everyone's expectations? I shook the thought away and told myself not to be ridiculous. I was just being dramatic. Then came the nightmares, disjointed dreams of me running through a maze in my wedding dress, calling out for Ethan but never finding him. The path kept branching. and I didn't know which direction to take. I'd wake up gasping in the dark, heart pounding. Ethan slept soundly beside me, blissfully unaware of my 3 a.m. terrors. In the morning, I'd check my phone, see a countdown for the wedding date, and feel dread blooming in my stomach. On top of that, I started noticing little things about Ethan that bugged me more than they used to. The way he insisted on brushing his teeth with the water running, wasting so much water. The way he planned every aspect of our budget, leaving little room for spontaneity. I wondered if these minor annoyances had always been there or if my stress was magnified. Either way, the sense of mismatch grew, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. The day before the wedding, I was a bundle of nerves. My friends arrived from out of town and we had a low-key bachelorette gathering. Just a few of us at a wine bar, laughing about old memories. I tried to act normal, but the panic twisted inside me. They noticed my anxiousness, but I pretended it was the usual pre-wedding jitters. Meanwhile, the next day loomed over me like a storm cloud. That morning, I woke up to sunshine streaming through the window. Ironically, perfect weather for a wedding. My sister, Kayla, helped me with my hair, and she kept saying how radiant I looked. "That's the glow of a bride," she teased. Little did she know I felt like an imposter wearing a mask of excitement I couldn't fully feel. My mother fussed over me, adjusting my veil, reminding me of the family members who had traveled so far to see me wed. "This is your big day," she said, eyes brimming with tears. "I'm so proud of you." The church was stunning. Flowers draped along the pews, white ribbons, soft candles. My heart hammered as the music began to play. My father whispered, "You ready, Peanut?" using my old nickname, and I forced a smile. Then, arm in arm with Dad, I started walking down the aisle. My gaze flicked from face to face. Old neighbors, college friends, my cousins, and then it landed on him. The dark-haired stranger in the last pew. I didn't recognize him from any social circle. He could have been a friend of a cousin, maybe a date someone brought along, except he stared at me with such intensity it felt personal. My steps faltered. Dad gave my arm a gentle squeeze. "Steady?" he murmured, but I could barely breathe. My eyes locked on the stranger's, and that's when he spoke in a low, clear voice I shouldn't have been able to hear over the organ music. "Ava, you're making a terrible mistake." Time seemed to slow. The blood drained from my face and I felt faint. My father, alarmed, tightened his hold on me. My mother, in the front row, furrowed her brow in concern. Ethan, standing at the altar, looked worried. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air, my fingers going numb around my bouquet. I squeezed Dad's arm in desperation. Instead of continuing to the altar, I took a halting step back, pushing myself away from the aisle. A ripple of confusion went through the guests, an uncertain murmuring. The organist faltered. And there, amid the swirl of stunned faces, the stranger watched me with a quiet, mournful gaze. Dad whispered frantically, "What's going on? Are you okay?" My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough oxygen. Without answering, I gathered my skirt and bolted, ignoring my mother's cry of dismay. The hush in the church turned into startled outcries as I fled, my heels clacking on the tile floor. I stumbled into a side chamber, seeking air or escape, anything to quell the roaring panic in my head. Inside that small, dimly lit room, I collapsed onto a chair, struggling to slow my breathing. My veil slipped off and I tore at the hairpins in frustration. Tears stung my eyes and I wasn't sure if it was from embarrassment or abject terror. Moments later, Ethan rushed in, followed closely by my sister and parents. They bombarded me with questions. Had I fainted? Was I having a panic attack? Did I need water? Ethan knelt in front of worry etched into every line of his face. "Ava," he whispered, "take a deep breath." "I'm here," I tried, inhaling shakily. But as soon as I looked at him, guilt seized. I saw the concern, the confusion. He deserved a confident partner, someone who wouldn't quake at the threshold of forever. My voice trembled. "I don't know if I can do this." The sentence tasted like betrayal on my tongue. Ethan's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "Of course you can. We've been planning this for so long. I love you, Ava." Kayla placed a hand on his shoulder, and my parents exchanged worried glances. I couldn't speak. Part of me wanted to blame that stranger who interrupted the ceremony, but deep down, I knew the doubt had been there for months. The door burst open again, revealing the same dark-haired man. My father shouted, "Who are you? You can't just barge in." But the stranger's gaze was locked on mine. He stepped forward calmly, ignoring the confusion. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I had to tell you before it was too late." Ethan stood, fists clenched. "What the hell is this? Do you know him, Ava?" I shook my head, speechless. The stranger lifted his hands in a placating gesture. "My name is James. I don't expect you to believe me, but I saw how terrified you were when you walked in. I recognized it because I went through the same thing with my own wedding. I made the wrong choice. I didn't speak up, and it destroyed both of us." Chaos erupted, with my dad demanding James leave, Kayla exclaiming that we should call security, and my mother on the verge of tears. But I raised a trembling hand to quiet. "Let him talk," I said. The room fell silent in shock. I turned to James, my voice wobbled. "What exactly are you saying?" He swallowed hard. "I can't stand by and watch someone make the same mistake I did. It isn't fair to you or to him," he added, gesturing toward Ethan. "If you're not sure, if your heart is screaming at you that this isn't right, then it's not too late to speak up." Tears slid down my cheeks. I felt unmoored, like a leaf in a storm. I looked at Ethan, my once steady companion. His expression was a mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. "Is that true?" he whispered. "Are you not sure?" Words failed me, so I just nodded miserably. A rush of guilt choked me. All those months, I'd brushed my doubts under the rug. Now, everything was crashing down in the most public, humiliating way. Ethan pressed his lips together, visibly holding back tears. Kayla glared at James with daggers in her eyes, and my parents looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them. Eventually, Ethan took a shaky breath and said, "Everyone's out there. They're waiting for us. What do we do now?" The question echoed in the hushed chamber. I saw a lifetime of memories in Ethan's gaze. High school dances, college trips, shared jokes, comfort, routine. But I also saw the future stretching before me. Would I always wonder if I'd settled out of fear or inertia? I was trembling from head to toe when I finally whispered, "I'm sorry." That single phrase told Ethan everything he needed to know. His shoulders sagged as though he'd been punched. My mother started to protest, but my father put a hand on her arm, shaking his head. The air was thick with heartbreak, confusion, and yet, oddly, I felt a glimmer of relief under the crushing weight of shame. "I think we have to cancel," I forced out, my voice hardly audible. A stunned silence engulfed us. Then the clamor began, my mother gasping, Kayla cursing, Ethan stepping back in shock, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. James looked torn, as though he wished he could vanish and spare everyone more pain. Minutes later, the news rippled through the church. The ceremony was called off. Guests who traveled hours to celebrate stood around, bewildered, exchanging whispers. The organ music ceased. Some relatives looked angry or insulted. Others tried to find me to offer comfort. I locked myself in a dressing room to escape the stares, my phone buzzing incessantly with texts and calls. Even as my world collapsed, a tiny voice inside whispered, "You did the right thing. You spoke the truth." By the time I emerged, most of the guests had departed, unsettled and confused. I found Ethan in a corner of the church hall, removing his boutonniere, eyes red. My heart lurched. I walked up to him, not sure if he'd scream or cry or walk away. Instead, he looked at me with desperate sadness. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he asked quietly. "We could have worked through it, or postponed at least. Anything but this." "I know," I murmured, throat tight. I was scared. I kept hoping the doubts would go away. "I never wanted to hurt you, Ethan." He nodded, tears threatening again. "I love you," he said. "If you need time, I'd give it to you. But if you're sure..." "I'm not sure of anything," I confessed. "Except that I couldn't stand at the altar and make vows I wasn't certain I could keep." He squeezed his eyes shut. Anguish etched into every feature. I stepped back, letting him breathe, letting him hold on to whatever dignity he had left. My entire body trembled with shame and sorrow, but the alternative would have been a silent, festering lie. In the following days, my life turned into a sea of phone calls, concerned messages, disappointed relatives, and canceled wedding plans. The fallout was massive. I moved into Kayla's spare room, feeling too guilty to face Ethan in the apartment we once shared. My parents were supportive but devastated. "We want you to be happy," my mom told me, tears still brimming. "But this is so painful." I knew it was. My entire family had put their hearts and energy into this wedding. Some people called me selfish, a runaway bride, an ungrateful partner. And maybe they were right. I avoided James at first, though he texted a few times, offering a listening ear or an apology for causing a scene. Anger, shame, and curiosity wrestled in my mind. Eventually, I agreed to meet him for coffee, if only to understand why he had intervened. When he arrived at the cafe, he carried the same air of quiet remorse I'd seen in the church. We found a corner table. At first, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, "Who are you, really?" He sighed, swirling his coffee cup. "I told you my name is James. I live a couple towns over. I was once in love with someone I married for all the wrong reasons. We had doubts, but we pushed forward because it felt like what everyone expected. Less than a year later, we were divorced, and she left devastated. I still carry that regret." His voice shook, revealing just how deep his scars ran. I leaned in, compelled by empathy. "So you saw me, saw my panic, and thought you could spare me the same pain?" He nodded. "I know how it looks. I had no right to speak up in the middle of your ceremony, but I couldn't shake the memory of my ex's face, and I recognized a similar fear in your eyes. Maybe I overstepped. I sipped my coffee, my heart a swirling mess. I don't know if you overstepped or not, I admitted. Part of me hates that I humiliated Ethan, hates the chaos, but another part of me is relieved. James's gaze flicked to mine, and he nodded in understanding. Sometimes the hardest truth sets us free. Our conversation meandered through guilt, regret, fear. He was surprisingly kind, offering gentle reminders that my feelings mattered. He wasn't pushy, didn't try to be my savior, just a compassionate ear. We parted on a note of cautious friendship. Meanwhile, Ethan shut me out. He needed time to heal, and I didn't blame him. He had every right to hate me, or at least resent me. Still, a piece of me clung to the possibility of reconciliation. Was I truly prepared to lose him forever? I wrestled with that question in lonely nights at Kayla's place. I tried going to therapy, hoping a professional could help untangle my mess of emotions. Through tearful sessions, I came to realize that my doubts about Ethan ran deeper than a fleeting case of cold feet. I craved a life that wasn't so meticulously planned, a love that felt alive with possibility. Maybe Ethan could have given me that if we'd communicated, but we never did. Months passed. The canceled wedding gradually became old gossip. Though the shame lingered, I found my footing at work, diving into editing projects that gave me a sense of purpose. I started writing again, drafting short stories late into the night. Sometimes I'd hear from Ethan. We'd exchange stilted pleasantries, both of us too raw for deeper connection. My mother fretted that I'd ruined my best chance at a stable, loving marriage. As for James, he remained in the periphery of my life. We texted occasionally, and every now and then we'd meet for a quiet walk in the park or to grab a bite. He never overstepped or tried to force a bond, but in those conversations I felt understood in a way I couldn't explain. We shared stories of heartbreak, of childhood, of how we'd lost ourselves trying to please everyone else. Slowly, I found my guard lowering. One evening, after a particularly bad day, an argument with my mom about my future plus a pile of manuscripts at work, I called James. He came over with takeout and a stack of DVDs. We watched cheesy old comedies and laughed until tears streamed down our faces. At some point, he mentioned how he once planned to travel the country in a beat-up RV, just to see new places and escape expectations. But he never followed through, letting life and routine hold him back. I listened, entranced by his honesty. That night, we ended up sharing our regrets under the glow of a cheap floor lamp. In a soft moment, he brushed a strand of hair from my face. "You deserve the chance to explore who you are," he said gently. For the first time in ages, I felt hope blossom in my chest. That hope collided with guilt over Ethan. I was terrified that letting James into my life was a betrayal. But with the help of therapy, I began to realize that sometimes relationships must end for both parties to grow. Ethan and I had become so enmeshed in each other's lives that we ignored the possibility that we might not want the same future. Eventually, I had a long, heartfelt conversation with him. We acknowledged the deep affection we'd share forever, but also admitted we weren't the same people we were at 18. With tears and hugs, we decided to let each other go, truly and fully. Months turned into a year. I gradually moved out of Kayla's and into a small apartment in the next town over, close to the publishing house. I decorated it with secondhand furniture and personal touches that reflected only my taste. I started volunteering at a local literacy program, reading stories to children on Saturday mornings. I found myself smiling more often. The anxious weight in my chest lifted bit by bit. James and I remained close friends, but cautious. We didn't want to springboard from one broken commitment to another. We took things slowly, meeting for coffee or a hike, sharing books and long talks. Over time, though, our connection deepened. It wasn't a fairy tale romance in the usual sense. It was built on vulnerability and shared regrets. The day we finally acknowledged we had feelings for each other, it felt natural, like stepping into a warm light we'd both been avoiding. We started dating with open eyes, talking honestly about fears and boundaries. Our friends and family found it strange at first, but soon realized this was no rebound. We were two people who had once been trapped in the wrong futures, now learning how to shape our own. I didn't know where it would lead, but I had discovered that uncertainty wasn't always a bad thing. A year and a half after the canceled wedding, I sat at my desk in the publishing house, editing an author's debut novel. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan, who was doing better too. He'd moved to a new city, found a new job he loved, and was dating someone who lit up his world in ways I never could. We'd remained on cordial terms, occasionally sharing updates on each other's lives. His message said, "Just wanted to say I'm proud of you for following your heart. I'm doing well. Hope you are too." I felt a swell of relief and gratitude. Yes, we'd all been hurt, but we'd grown. Sometimes, you have to detonate what you thought was certain to find what truly matters. A few minutes later, James called. He was picking me up for dinner after work. His voice over the phone was warm, inviting. The memory of how we first met, his unexpected intrusion at my wedding, still gave me a strange flutter. But as surreal and dramatic as that moment had been, it forced me to face the truth. And for that, I would always be grateful. People still ask me what happened with the wedding, especially if they hadn't caught the full story. Sometimes I just tell them it wasn't meant to be. Other times, if I sense they're also trapped in a spiral of doubts, I offer more detail, how a random stranger's warning was the spark that forced me to confront what I'd been hiding from myself. It's uncomfortable to admit I nearly stood at the altar, ready to exchange vows I couldn't fully promise. But it's more frightening to imagine a future where I said, I do, out of fear. I'm not naive enough to claim that James is my guaranteed soulmate or that the path ahead will be seamless. But at least now, every step we take is an honest. And every time I doubt myself, I remember that moment in the church when I locked eyes with, heard him say those fateful words and realized there was no turning back. Sometimes a single sentence can change everything. His was, Ava, you're making a terrible mistake. He might as well have said, Ava, wake up. This is your life. Don't sleepwalk through it. I try to live by that principle now. Yes, it was a painful lesson. Yes, it caused heartbreak, confusion, and chaos. But if I had the chance to rewrite my story, I wouldn't erase that moment. It opened the door to a reality where I'm true to myself, where love isn't just about meeting expectations, but about finding real, mutual understanding and passion. That, to me, is worth all the tears in the world. And so here I am, months after the fact, living a life that's less about should and more about genuine choices. I won't pretend it's neat or easy, but it's real. Some days, I still get pangs of guilt thinking about the wedding that never happened. I wonder if my family will ever stop talking about that fiasco in hushed tones. Yet I also catch myself smiling when I recall the hush in the church as I fled, bouquet in hand, because that was the moment I stopped being a passenger in my own life. I became the driver, for better or worse. If there's any message I'd share with someone who feels the same dread I did, it's this. Don't wait for a random stranger to call you out. Listen to the voice inside you, even if it's inconvenient or terrifying. Everyone deserves the chance to choose a life freely and wholeheartedly. The day you say your vows, whether it's to another person, to a dream, or even to yourself, make sure it's a promise you can stand by with both feet on the ground. That's my story. Not quite a fairy tale, but in its own way, more beautiful. Sometimes you find truth when you least expect it, whispered by someone you've never even met, urging you to open your eyes before it's too late.